Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on a story of incredible courage, one that's often left in the margins of the history books. We're talking about an unseen army, the Indian South Africans who were right there on the front lines, fighting in one of the 20th century's most important freedom struggles. Now, if you want the full story on the system of apartheid itself, you should definitely check out our previous explainer on that. This time, though, we're zeroing in on a critical piece of the puzzle that's so often forgotten. Because the fight against apartheid is usually painted as a black and white story, but the truth is so much richer. It was a multiracial, multi-generational coalition, and Indian South Africans were in the thick of it from the very beginning. So where does this story begin? Well, it starts not with an army holding guns, but with an idea, a revolutionary idea, forged in the fires of South African discrimination by a young lawyer who had just arrived from India, a man named Mohandas Gandhi. You see, when Gandhi got to South Africa, he was hit with this wall of discriminatory laws aimed squarely at the Indian community. But instead of meeting hate with hate, he came up with something completely new, a radical new tool for protest. His vision was bigger than just one community. It was about tearing down all the barriers that keep people apart. He called it satyagraha. It's a Sanskrit word that means something like truth force or soul force. And look, this was way more than just a protest tactic. It was a whole philosophy. The idea was to use nonviolent resistance not just to break an unfair law, but to force a moral confrontation, to literally try and change the heart of your oppressor through your own willingness to suffer. It was a game-changing new way to fight. And this new weapon, it wasn't born in a vacuum. Back in 1894, Gandhi had already founded the Natal Indian Congress to give the community a political voice. But the real breaking point came in 1906, with this deeply humiliating law called the Black Act, which was all about controlling and segregating Indians. That was the last straw, and in response, the very first Satyagraha campaign kicked off, turning passive resistance into a powerful, active force in South Africa. Okay, so Gandhi eventually left South Africa in 1914, but the seeds he planted? They were about to grow into something bigger and even more radical. By the 1940s, a whole new generation of Indian leaders was rising up, and they were ready to take the fight to a whole new level. And this new generation, they weren't interested in the old ways. The old guard had focused on writing petitions and trying to make deals with the white government. But the new guard looked at that and said, nope, that's a dead end. They wanted mass action, they wanted confrontation, and most importantly, they made a brilliant strategic leap. They realized that the Indian question could never be solved on its own. The only way forward was to fight for the liberation of all oppressed South Africans. And let me tell you, this new guard was full of these incredible, charismatic leaders. You had doctors like Yusuf Dadoo and Monty Naicker, who took over the Indian congresses and just completely changed their direction away from caution and towards mass mobilization. And they inspired this wave of young activists like Ahmed Kathrada, who was so passionate that he joined the Young Communist League when he was only 12 years old. Just incredible. So you've got all this new, radical energy bubbling up. All it needed was a spark to set it off, a moment that would unite the community and completely change the game for the entire freedom struggle. And that spark came in 1946 with a single piece of legislation that just lit a fire across the country. The government gave it this long, stuffy name, the Asiatic Land Tenure and Indian Representation Act. But everybody knew what it really was. They called it the Ghetto Act. It was designed to completely cripple the Indian community, telling them where they could and could not live, own land, or run a business. And the response was immediate and defiant. The Indian Congress launched its biggest protest ever, the 1946 Passive Resistance Campaign. And get this, for 2 solid years, thousands of volunteers, men and women, just peacefully and deliberately occupied land where they were forbidden. They set up tents, they held signs, and they invited arrest. It was this massive act of defiance, and it led to almost 2,000 people being thrown in jail. Just an unbelievable display of organized, nonviolent power. And people noticed. The world was watching. But you know who was watching really, really closely? The leaders of the African National Congress. A young, fiery member of the ANC Youth League named Nelson Mandela, well, he later wrote about how seeing the discipline and the sacrifice of this campaign was a direct inspiration. He and his friends saw a powerful new way to wage their own struggle. So this wasn't just a friendly way from a distance. They made it official.
In 1947, the leaders, Dr. Zuma from the ANC and Dr. Dadoo and Dr. Naicker from the Indian Congresses, they signed what became known as the Doctors' Pact. It was a formal promise of full cooperation, and it laid the foundation for the Great Congress Alliance, creating a powerful, multiracial front to fight against apartheid. So the alliance was forged, a united front, but its strength was about to be tested, again and again, in the very dark and difficult decades of struggle that were just around the corner.
And the alliance's first big move together was the 1952 Defiance Campaign. It was this massive, coordinated, but still nonviolent assault on the laws of apartheid. You had African and Indian volunteers side by side, purposefully breaking segregation laws, walking through whites-only doors, sitting on whites-only benches. It was the biggest multiracial protest South Africa had ever seen, and it showed everyone the power they had when they stood together. But as we know, peaceful protest was met with just brutal state violence, and the struggle had to change. When the movement shifted to armed resistance, with Umkhonto we Sizwe, Indian activists were right there too. And that led to the famous Rivonia trial. Standing in the dock right next to Nelson Mandela and Walter Sisulu were men like Ahmed Kathrada and Billy Nair. They faced the same charges of sabotage and they received the same sentence, life in prison on the infamous Robben Island. They faced the same charges, got the same brutal sentences, and they shared the same tiny prison cells on Robben Island. Together, they literally built the vision for a non-racial, democratic South Africa. Which brings us to the big question. Why is their crucial role so often overlooked? Well, the simple answer is that history loves a simple story, right? It's easier to tell. And the story of apartheid is often boiled down to this simple, binary conflict. But that simplification, while it's powerful, it erases the complex, interconnected efforts that were absolutely essential to winning the fight. The real story is richer and honestly, way more inspiring. Because when you look at the facts, the legacy is just undeniable. Indian South Africans pioneered mass passive resistance in that country. Their alliance with the ANC is what cemented non-racialism as a core principle of the movement. Their 1946 campaign, that took the struggle onto the world stage, leading to the very first UN resolution against South Africa. And they provided key leaders and brilliant strategists at every single turn. And you know what? That work is still going on today. The fight to remember this inclusive history is being carried on by organizations like the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation. It exists to make sure the sacrifices of these heroes are never, ever forgotten, and that the principle they fought for, a truly non-racial society, continues to guide South Africa's future. So what's the big takeaway here? Remembering these unseen heroes doesn't take anything away from anyone else's struggle. It does the opposite. It gives us a fuller, a truer, and a much more powerful picture of how freedom was actually won. It's a reminder that history isn't just written by the victors. It's written by who we, in the present, choose to remember. And that leaves you with a question, doesn't it? What other unseen armies are just waiting to be discovered in the pages of our own history books?